Today's short passage, Luke 9, verse 51 through to 62, the end of the chapter, is a deeply challenging passage. It's about the cost of discipleship, the cost of following Jesus, and the nature of discipleship, of what it really means to be a follower of Jesus. And the passage starts with a deep insight into Jesus's thinking. Luke records verse 51 that it says that it's approaching the time for him to be taken up to heaven. Now that is interesting. In fact, it's exceptional advice for any of us today in how to overcome hardship. You see, Jesus is not so much heading to the cross, to the place of torture and death. Rather, he is heading through the cross to the place of victory. His eyes are on the other side. He can see the mountain peak, and that is going to help him to endure the valley experience. So he sets his course resolutely. That word resolutely in Greek literally means like a flint arrowhead, heading straight for its target. Jesus heads through the cross, through the resurrection to his ascension. And that course, that direction through Jerusalem, through the cross, physically and geographically meant that he was going to have to take the most direct route through Samaria. And hopefully you know that no good Jew would have done that, because the Jews and Samaritans, they were enemies. They'd been enemies for over 500 years, since the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians, and the Israelites were rounded up and carried off as slaves, apart from some small handful of farmers on the outskirts. And those farmers, during the captivity, they intermarried, they became the Samaritan people that we know today. So there was a lot of bad blood, bad feeling between these two groups and their expectations of each other. Anyway, Jesus decides to go the most direct route through Samaria. He's heading to Jerusalem like an arrowhead, heading for its target. And he immediately occurs a setback. He's rejected. He isn't welcomed into the Samaritan village like he's been welcomed as a celebrity everywhere else. Now the disciples, they know their Old Testament scriptures, and they think, right, it's time to do an Elijah. Let's call down fire from heaven to destroy these people like Elijah did when Ahaziah sent soldiers to kill Elijah. That's what they're thinking. But that's not Jesus's way, because he's opening up a new way of grace and of mercy and of peace that will triumph over justice and judgment. And anyway, apart from that, we're going to read on tomorrow. The next thing that will happen will be Jesus will send out his true disciples, 72 of them, in pairs, village to village, to find people of peace to be welcomed in. And Jesus says, when they don't welcome you in, like they've not welcomed me, simply shake the dust off your feet. In other words, trust in future judgment, ultimate judgment, rather than you becoming judge and calling down far from heaven now, because this is a period, an era of grace. And we live in that today. And as they head to Jerusalem, we then have these three people, these three encounters, three men who want to join this growing crowd of disciples. And I think we'd have been like, sign them up. They've got a pulse. Let's get them to belong, and then we can work on them believing. But it's not quite what Jesus does here. He sets a very high bar. Now, the first man says, I will follow you wherever you go. He's thinking of a final destination. And I think he's probably thinking that final destination will be Jerusalem. It will be a palace. It will be a throne for an earthly ruler, King Jesus. And Jesus is like, come on, look at my life. I've been wandering around the region homeless for 3 years. Like the foxes have holes, the birds have nests. I don't have any earthly palace or throne to call my own. If you want to follow me, become like me. become a pilgrim on a journey. The second man, well, he has no sense of urgency. This process of Jewish burial would have held him back for maybe up to a year or more. If you buried a body, then later on after decomposition, you would then take the bones and put them in a little box of sarcophagus for the family. And Jesus was saying that there was an urgency about this mission. It's all about focus, it's about priority. And then finally, the man who says, well, let me first say goodbye to my family. And, this would have been more than a quick goodbye. It would have been returning to a family who would have tried to put the pressure on him to talk him out of that journey of discipleship. And Jesus alludes to the example of Elisha here. When Elijah calls Elisha to follow him, he leaves immediately and he burns his plough. There's no going back because he's burnt his bridges, he's all in. And again, Jesus uses this idea of focus and vision. Keep looking ahead like an athlete focused on the finish line, like the arrow heading to its target. Now, I do think it's best to understand all these three examples of people trying to slow Jesus down, to hinder Jesus. Jesus is never in a rush. If you've ever prayed for breakthrough, you'll know that. But he won't be slowed down. And we are his followers. So let him lead you through the cross into freedom. Prioritize kingdom proclamation above personal comfort. Don't look back to the old life and keep moving forward into the new.